The Nanagat Cave Temple. The Nanagat Cave Temple is one of the most mysterious places in all of India. The temple itself is located in Nanagat, a mountain pass in the Western Ghats mountain range. The pass is about 75 miles north from the largest major city. In ancient times, it was part of a trading route traversed by merchants and their caravans. But the mountain pass is most famous for its cave temple, which has inscriptions in an ancient Indo-Aryan dialect that go back to the 2nd century BC. The inscriptions mostly speak of Hinduism and its many deities, but also refer to ancient rituals and the Satavahanas dynasty that once controlled the area. The Nanagot Cave was probably a rest stop used by travelers moving through the mountains. Its name literally translates to coin pass. This has led researchers to believe that someone had lived in the cave full time and collected a toll from any trader who wished to cross to the other side. In fact, what some archaeologists have mistook for a stupa is actually nothing but a roadside toll booth. The mysterious cave was first discovered in modern times in 1828 by a man named William Sykes who was hiking in the area. While not an archaeologist or a historian, this outdoor enthusiast on a hike made what turned out to be a fascinating discovery.
Inca Mummy of the Andes. Climbers discovered something gruesome and shocking high in the Andes Mountains of South America. At the top of Mount Yuyayaco, they came across remains of an almost perfectly preserved Inca girl wrapped in a blanket. This discovery was made in Argentina, and the preserved girl looked as though she had been frozen just hours before the team of researchers found her. In truth, she had been sitting on top of that mountain for roughly 500 years. She was part of the Inca civilization and was one of 3 children taken to the peak of the volcano at about 22,000 feet. And there, she and the other 2 children were drugged with cocaine and alcohol before being placed inside of a small cavern under the ground and left as sacrifice. The deaths of these children were part of an obscure Inca ritual. They were sacrificed for something scientists have only ever been able to speculate on. Nobody has figured out why the kids were taken to such an insanely high spot on the mountain. Normally, in Inca society, the act of child sacrifice was used to commemorate something important. If a great leader died, children needed to be given to the gods. If there was a great famine and people were dying, the same thing had to happen. And although this was just another part of Inca society, it wasn't taken lightly. Such a sacrifice could only be made with the direct approval of the Inca emperor. Interestingly, the children chosen for such sacrifices were almost always the sons and daughters of local nobility. The 3 children found at the summit of Yuyayaco are now considered to be among the best preserved mummies on Earth. Because of the freezing temperatures at the peak of the mountain, the children have never been able to decay, making them better preserved than almost any mummy ever found.
Cave Temple. On Shodoshima Island in Japan, there is a series of mysterious cave temples high up in the mountains. These temples were originally occupied by monks, and to access them, some monks and pilgrims climbed up the sheer rock faces using chains just to reach them. Inside the safety of the caves, the monks meditated in privacy, far away from the prying eyes of society. Nowadays, accessing the temples for either pilgrimage or tourism is much easier, since there are real roads and stairs. But centuries ago, it was incredibly difficult to get here. The first main group of temples are on the southeast part of the island, gathered on a group of peaks about 1,500 feet high. These temples are hardly noticeable from the ground, tucked into the niches in the rock. One of the temples, simply called Temple 1, was dedicated to Kobo Daishi, the famous founder of Shingon Buddhism. Legend has it that a mysterious spring inside the cave was created by Kobo himself when he struck the ground with his staff and released a clean flow of water from within. The most mind-boggling sight is the Konpira Shrine, standing at the top of the mountain, where it looks impossible for any human to have ever built anything. It is honestly incredible how anyone could have climbed up the cliff face with construction materials. Nevertheless, the shrine still stands today in a rock crevice, mysterious and fascinating. Bridge of the Inca. The Bridge of the Inca is a fascinating monument and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It can be found high up in the Andes Mountains in Argentina, somewhere around 7,000 feet above sea level. The place is fascinating for 2 main reasons.
First of all, it's a natural bridge and one of the most striking geological places in all of South America. Secondly, the Inca used the Puente del Inca as part of their vast road network. The whole region is riddled with ancient ruins, yet the bridge itself is 100% natural. The Inca didn't need to do anything in terms of construction. The bridge was already there. But of course, the Inca had some pretty cool legends surrounding the bridge. It's said that the heir to the throne of the empire was affected by a strange and mysterious paralysis. Healers recommended that the heir go from Cusco to the slopes of the Inca bridge to heal in the natural springs. But when they reached it, there was no bridge there. Inca warriors had to embrace each other and form a human bridge so that the paralyzed heir could be brought across. The heir was then dipped in the hot springs and magically healed. When he turned around, the Inca warriors had all petrified, creating the stone bridge that still stands today.
Little Petra. Little Petra is the smaller but no less significant archaeological site in Jordan, just north of the normal Petra. Just like its more famous counterpart, Little Petra was a Nabatean site from thousands of years ago. The buildings are carved into the mountain walls in the same fashion as they are at Petra, so that the great buildings blend in perfectly with the sandstone canyons. The only big difference is that Little Petra, as its name suggests, is quite a bit smaller than the other one. The entire site is connected by only about 1,400 feet of canyon and can be reached pretty easily by walking from the main site of Petra. The city of Petra and the surrounding area was lost to the Western world for hundreds of years. It was once a bustling trade center with very skilled builders, but it was often under attack from jealous societies like the Greeks and the Romans. We know Little Petra was built around the same time as the rest, back in the 1st century AD, and although archaeologists don't know exactly what all the buildings were used for, they do think the site was a kind of suburb of Petra. It also may have served as an agricultural center and resupply post. Whereas Petra was the capital of the Nabateans, Little Petra could have also been where the ruling elites lived outside the rabble of the main city. Either that, or it was used specifically to house Silk Road traders when they visited Petra. After the Nabateans declined, were destroyed by Rome, and eventually vanished, Little Petra fell into disrepair and was also abandoned. An earthquake helped finish everything off. For the last 1,500 years or so, it was used by Bedouin nomads for shelter. Only 15% of Petra has been explored, and scientists believe there is plenty more still waiting to be found.
Ancient villages in the Wyoming mountains. Archaeologists in Wyoming have found a series of ancient villages that were deserted thousands of years ago by the original inhabitants of the region. Matthew Stern from the University of Sheffield, along with his colleagues, found the 13 ancient villages. By combing through the wreckage of these long-lost settlements, Matthew and his team have been able to learn more about the lives of the ancestors of modern Native American tribes, like the Northern Paiute, the Comanche, and the Shoshone. The villages were uncovered in the Wind River Range, built high up in the mountains over 2,000 years ago. What makes this discovery so fascinating is that scientists have generally associated high altitudes with prehistoric travel, but not living. Scientists said it made no sense for ancient people to be living high up in the mountains. Well, tell that to the Inca and Machu Picchu. But 13 villages make a pretty substantial statement, meaning all of these presumptions are completely invalid. See, told ya. The settlements were found at over 9,000 feet, so people definitely lived and even thrived at high altitudes. Researchers believe the main staple of food for these mountain villagers have been the pine nuts from white-bark pine trees. They even found grindstones that were once used to mash up pine nuts for consumption. But this just goes to show that there is so much we don't know about the original inhabitants of America.
Wyoming Sky Villages. The Wind River Range is part of the Rocky Mountains, and it stretches 100 miles across northern Wyoming. It goes all the way from the thick forests of Yellowstone National Park to the sprawling grasslands of the Great Plains. The tallest peaks are about 13,000 feet above sea level and contain a landscape of high-altitude summits and tundra, along with the few remaining glaciers in America from the Ice Age. It's within this mountain range that one of the oldest high-altitude settlements in America can be found. The site is known as High Rise Village, and it's 11,000 feet above sea level, extending out from the side of a hill. It would have made living here a diagonal nightmare, like living on the edge of a ski run. And yet it was a huge settlement occupied by the Shoshone people about 4,000 years ago. They lived here until the end of the 19th century, when Europeans dominated the landscape. The site was discovered in 2006 by Richard Adams with the University of Wyoming. It was the first and biggest of over 20 similar settlements in the Wind River Mountains. About 4,000 years ago, this was a prehistoric landscape. There used to be villages and paths winding through the alpine tundra. Several outposts were also located here, and there was plenty of food for everyone to eat. There was a thriving culture of Native Americans, way above the other groups and safe in the natural defense of the mountains.
Mesopotamia's first empire. Archaeologists in Iraq recently discovered an ancient lost city below the modern Iraqi city of Kurdistan. The ruins were found at the edge of the Zagros Mountains and were part of Mesopotamia's first empire some 4,000 years ago. The hidden settlement was found by a French mission which had been active in the area since 2012. Ever since Iraq opened up to scientists, archaeologists have been busy trying to hunt down lost archaeological sites like this one. Initial excavations suggest the place was a thriving city populated by mountain people at the western edge of Mesopotamia's border. Researchers discovered the foundations of buildings, ancient tablets, artifacts, and evidence of livestock farming and irrigation. The tablets have proven to be interesting because they appear to be records of trading between merchants, with items such as flour listed in ancient writing. Based on the location of the settlement, it was probably part of the Akkadian Empire. This was the first true empire that ruled the Mesopotamian region, stretching from the edge of Turkey to the Persian Gulf. While little is known about the place, it was sizable, with a few thousand residents. Archaeologists will need to do more excavations throughout the area to see just what kind of role the settlement played in the Akkadian Empire. A face in the mountain. A large and very mysterious face was recently found on the cliffside of an island in the Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. The face is exactly what it sounds like. A truly huge human face carved out of the rock on the side of a cliff in the absolute middle of nowhere. The face can be found on Reeks Island in British Columbia, Canada. This is not a place you can reach very easily and rarely sees human visitors. The person who found the face carved high up in the mountainous terrain of the island was Hank Gus, a member of the Teshat First Nation. Hank had heard about the face from a kayaker who saw it by accident. It then took Hank 2 years of tireless searching to finally find it himself. Now that's dedication. Have you ever been that dedicated to finding anything? Tell me about your experience in the comments. The face is about 7 feet tall and looks strikingly like some other faces made by the ancient Teshat people. They have been living in this part of British Columbia for thousands of years, so it's no surprise that there are still some archaeological treasures lying around undiscovered. This is one of the largest areas of untouched nature still left in the world, where massive stone faces can still go unseen for years. The Throne of Agamemnon. Some archaeological drama has been unfolding in Greece. It all has to do with an ancient mountain site in Peloponnese, which was once part of the great ancient kingdom of Mycenae. Archaeologist Christophilis Magidis claims that he and his team of experts discovered a giant stone slab that was once part of King Agamemnon's throne. This would place the rock back to around the 13th century BC, to the end of the Mycenaean civilization. These people flourished in the later part of the Bronze Age, and their influence spread throughout Greece, all the way across the Aegean Sea to Crete and the Cycladic Islands. King Agamemnon is one of the most famous figures in Greek mythology. He was the legendary commander of the Greeks during the Trojan War and is often considered a mythical person. However, archaeological evidence shows that King Agamemnon may have really ruled Mycenae for a time, although it's still unclear what role he played in the Trojan War. So here's the drama. According to the Athens Archaeological Society, Christophilis Magidis didn't discover the king's throne. They said in a recent press conference that the archaeologist's claims are totally unfounded and that there is no evidence whatsoever to back up his supposed discovery. In fact, the society said the giant piece of stone that Christophilis found was probably just part of a household. It likely had nothing to do with the king.
So now we are at a weird point where one archaeologist says there is proof of King Agamemnon ruling from the ruins high up in the mountains, while another group of archaeologists say it's nothing but a scientific diversion to get attention.
Ancient viruses. Scientists studying glacier ice high up in the Tibetan mountains have stumbled upon viruses frozen in the ice for 15,000 years. These viruses survived because they remained frozen. They presumably could have continued to live for thousands of years more if they had been left in the ice. They were discovered because scientists took a pair of ice samples from high up in the mountains, about 22,000 feet above sea level. The ice on the glaciers formed gradually for a very long time, according to researchers from Ohio State University. As the ice was forming, it trapped dust, gas from the atmosphere, bacteria, and viruses. To make sense of this, think of the glacier ice as one big sticky rat trap. Year after year, whatever was floating in the atmosphere at the time that the ice was frozen was trapped. The next year, when more ice froze, whatever was in the atmosphere then was also trapped. All the scientists needed to do was drill down into the ice to get a timeline of all the different things that were captured from the atmosphere over the past 15,000 years. What they discovered were 33 viruses. 4 of them have already been identified by modern scientists, but 28 of them are new, and about half of those only survived because of the frozen conditions. What this means is that they probably can't live outside of an environment that isn't terribly cold. And while the viruses haven't proved contagious or fatal for humans yet, who knows what else could be lurking in the Tibetan mountains, trapped within layers of ice and snow.
Ural Mountains moose. There is a massive moose hidden in the Ural Mountains of Siberia. It was discovered in 2011 by a group of researchers led by Alexander Shestakov. It came as a big shock because the moose is a geoglyph, and it looks like something you would expect to find grouped in with the Nazca lines of Peru. But this was found high in the rural Siberian mountains, an impressive rock geoglyph stretching 900 feet long. Researchers dated the structure as being built sometime between 4000 and 3000 BC. This makes the geoglyph extraordinarily old. At maximum, it was made 6,000 years ago and is still visible from the air today. Recent excavations unveiled 155 stone tools near the geoglyph, most of which were likely used for digging up or breaking stones. Stanislav Grigoriev from the Chelyabinsk History and Archaeology Institute says the tools appear to have been used by adults and children. The Neolithic people living in the mountains brought the whole community together to participate in the creation of the moose. Entire families and their tiny children helped dig trenches 30 feet wide, then filled them with stone to create the outline of the moose. Still, the geoglyph is a massive mystery, since nothing like it has ever been found before in the region, and archaeologists don't understand what the purpose of such a gigantic stone creature was.
The Nanagot Hills. The Nanagot Hills rise nearly 3,000 feet above sea level in India and are part of an ancient mountain pass filled with water cisterns, mysterious caves, and ancient ruins that have long since been destroyed. The very peak of the Nanagot Hills is at the top of a cliff overlooking a vast landscape of green forests and rolling pastures. These days, it's a popular place for hikers and rock climbers, but the history of the hills goes back much further. Ancient traders moving through India were forced to cross over the Nanagot Hills. Because so many caravans moved along the route, it's no surprise that buildings cropped up here and there. Merchants would spend the night in caves or at outposts set up in the misty plateaus. In fact, the name Nanagot, roughly translated, means coin pass, as the area acted as a sort of toll booth between trading regions. But one of the most mysterious caves goes back even further, to around the 1st century BC, during the Satavahana dynasty. There are inscriptions in this cave believed to be roughly 2,000 years old. These inscriptions have fascinated historians for one main reason. According to specialist George Buhler, the inscriptions are some of the oldest historical writings in Western India. The inscriptions speak of Vedic deities and Hindu deities, linking the two religions. This is important because it proves that even with the rise of Hinduism, the older Vedic ideas were still practiced into the 1st century BC.
Prehistoric Campers. An interesting new study has given some insight into the patterns of mountain people in America 11,000 years ago. It was in the year 2006 that Dr. Richard Adams, an archaeologist from Laramie, Wyoming, discovered a prehistoric settlement 11,000 feet high in the mountains of Wyoming. It was an amazing discovery that turned the world of American archaeology upside down. Nobody had thought there would be an alpine village hidden so high in the mountains. It was assumed the native people lived in the flatlands and wouldn't have bothered going up so high. Archaeologists found pottery, bone tools, arrowheads, and other evidence that some primitive group had been there at least 2,000 years ago. Then the researchers started spreading out across the mountain ridges. They came across other sites, dozens of them, some over 11,000 years old. As it turned out, the mountain wilderness of Wyoming has been a popular destination for human settlers since around the time humans first arrived in America. People hunted in the mountain peaks, lived in basic huts, and didn't seem to mind the weather at all. But who exactly these people were, how extensive their settlements may have been, and where they went is still a total mystery. Nepur. The ancient Mesopotamian city of Nepur is one of the greatest mountain cities in the world. It was once the greatest holy city on earth and represented the epicenter for religious teachings in Mesopotamia. It can be found today in southern Iraq and lasted all the way from roughly 5000 BC until the year 800. That's almost 8,000 consecutive years without being abandoned. No easy feat for any city of the world. Nippur was the home of Enlil, the Mesopotamian god who ruled over the air, wind, earth, and storms. One of the reasons Nippur survived such bloody conflict in the early days of Mesopotamia was that it really made itself known as a holy place rather than a political capital. And when it came to wars, both sides were terrified of facing the wrath of the gods, and so no one dared take their army up the mountain to tear down the holy city. Nippur belonged to the civilization of Sumer. The Sumerians ruled most of southern Mesopotamia, and each of their cities was ruled over by its own king. Politics were a significant part of this culture, and they are still considered to be the very first highly advanced civilization to rise up. It comes as no surprise that they were able to make one of the world's first great cities so high in the mountains that it almost touched the sky. But alas, the once great holy city is now a decaying ruin. Even after it survived the violence of the Babylonians, the destruction of the old gods, the rise of Rome, it couldn't survive the rise of Persia. After the Sassanid dynasty came to power around 250 AD, Nippur was left to decay.
Mountains on the moon. The famous astronomer Galileo Galilei made a rather impressive discovery regarding mountains. But this discovery was not actually on our planet. We need to look a bit further, all the way to the moon. Why? In 1609, Galileo became the first person to discover mountains on the surface of the moon. Back in 1609, people still believed that our planet was simply a realm where mortals lived. They thought that space was a heavenly place where all celestial bodies were completely perfect and smooth spheres. What I mean by that is that things like the sun, the moon, and every star in the sky was supposed to be a perfectly smooth and bright marble. When Galileo discovered that there are mountains on the moon, it created quite the upheaval. People were absolutely furious. They blamed Earth and the corruption of humans for the contamination of the moon. Up until Galileo's discovery, a lot of scientists explained the fact that there were dark patches on the moon by saying it was just different densities of different materials. There couldn't possibly be mountains because it was perfectly circular and smooth like a polished stone. But Galileo saw through his telescope small shadows that moved depending on the position of the sun. These shadows moved along the surface of the moon just like shadows move on the surface of the Earth when the sun rises and sets over mountains. To Galileo, this led to a very obvious conclusion. Unfortunately, the Church was not a big fan of this discovery. Later on, when Galileo tried to explain that the Earth revolves around the sun, he was sentenced to a lifetime of house arrest for blasphemy.
Masada. 1,300 feet above the Dead Sea in Israel is an ancient stone fortress. It's sitting atop a rocky mesa, a high-altitude plateau overlooking a vast landscape full of lost history from the days of the Bible. The ancient fortress is called Masada, and it's one of the most important World Heritage Sites in the entire world. Masada's significance has to do with the Jewish people and their Roman enemies. In the 1st century BC, Herod the Great, the king of Judea, built Masada as a castle complex for himself. Then, when the Romans took over several decades later, the fortress became a last stand for the Jewish people. The Romans annexed Judea and built a garrison inside King Herod's fortress. However, then came the Great Revolt of 66 AD. A group of angry Jewish people, tired of being subjugated, stormed Masada and took over the mountain complex. Unfortunately, the rebels were outnumbered by the Romans. The leader, named Menahem, was murdered, and Jerusalem was destroyed. The few rebels still alive at Masada were then hunted down by the Romans. The 960 surviving rebels were soon under siege by a legion of 8,000 Romans. After several months stuck inside the castle, the Jewish rebels had no hope of escaping. When it became clear they were about to meet their fate at the hands of the Romans, they flung themselves off the side of the mountain to prevent the massacre. Masada was then abandoned and was turned into a monastery. In the 7th century, the fortress was deserted again, and the site wasn't rediscovered by archaeologists until 1828.
The Rock of Guatapé. The Rock of Guatapé is an incredible place in Colombia. Though it isn't exactly a mountain, it is remarkably similar to one. It's actually an enormous rock that weighs about 10 million tons and was once worshipped by the Termesos Indians as a god, centuries before the Spaniards ever showed up. The Rock of Guatapé is the tallest thing for miles around, visible from nearly everywhere from the surrounding towns of Guatapé, Colombia, about 2 hours outside of Medellin. At the highest point of the rock, it has an elevation of 7,005 feet above sea level. A staircase built into the stone made up of 659 steps leads to the top. The view from the top of the staircase is astounding, offering panoramic views of the surrounding countryside. Residents turned the rock into a tourist attraction. There is some other rather unusual history associated with the rock. The letters G and I appear painted on the side, but it was actually the beginning of the name of the town Guatapé that was being painted. However, a mob from a neighboring town that also claimed the rock, El Peñol, interrupted the process, so only the single stroke of the U was completed. The two towns have had a long-standing dispute over the location. Lost City on the Mountain. Archaeologists discovered a lost city on the top of a Greek mountain that dates back 2,500 years. The fact that nobody ever found it until recently is kind of hard to imagine. It was in 2016 that the international team of Swedish and Greek archaeologists came across the lost city buried underneath the earth, 190 miles from Athens and way above sea level. It was found literally in the clouds on the Strongmilovuni Hill, which is on the Thessalian plains. According to researcher Robin Runland, an expert in classical archaeology and ancient history, he and his team learned that nobody had ever explored this particular hill before. They didn't know what they were going to find, but knew it hadn't been looked at by archaeologists yet. So they climbed to its summit and found a city covering an area of 99 acres. They discovered walls and towers and were even greeted by the city gates upon their arrival. Though, of course, none of this was visible from the ground below. The only way to see it was by actually climbing the mountain and reaching its peak, which nobody had done before. It was one of the last explored places in Greece and is still stumping scientists today. Researchers found pottery, coins, and other artifacts that have dated the city back to 500 BC. However, why it was abandoned, who founded the city in the first place, and what in the world it was doing on the top of a mountain are all questions that have still yet to be answered. Do you think there are any other unexplored places like this where an ancient city is sitting untouched, waiting to be found? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos like these coming soon. The boot in the Himalayas. In the year 1970, Italian climber Gunther Messner died on the slopes of Naga Parbat in Pakistan. He was trying to climb to the top of the mountain when he was swept away by a violent avalanche and never seen again. His death on that cold and unforgiving mountain was always assumed but never confirmed. Not until recently, 50 years after his death, when one of his boots was found frozen in a Himalayan glacier. To make the story even more tragic, Gunther had been accompanied by his brother Reinhold, who narrowly escaped the avalanche and wandered for 6 days through the freezing snow until he was rescued. Reinhold would go on to be the first man to climb Everest without oxygen, and had always known that he had cheated death. But Reinhold never abandoned the memory of his dead brother. 52 years after Gunther died, his climbing boot was found on Naga Parbat, sitting there on the slope as if it hadn't moved in decades. But sadly, Gunther's whole body wasn't found, only a few pieces of bone nearby.
Mysterious human remains. On a California mountain peak, the discovery of a skeleton created quite a mystery. It all began when a pair of climbers were reaching the top of Mount Williamson, the second highest peak in the state of California. They happened upon what looked to be a skeleton buried underneath some stones in a field of boulders. When they got close enough to inspect the skeleton, it was pretty obvious that it belonged to a person and that they had been dead for a very long time. Nothing remained of this individual except a pair of leather shoes, a worn-out belt, and of course, his pale white bones. According to the Inyo County Sheriff's Department, nobody has any idea who this person was, how they died, or really any facts of the case. The spokeswoman for the department, Karma Roper, said it's a huge mystery. Here are all the facts we have anyway. The body was discovered at an altitude of roughly 14,000 feet. The average person would not hike to such an extreme height. Plus, the hikers who found the body had accidentally strayed off course and gotten a bit lost. The body could have been there for years, or even decades. Yet there have been no missing people from the area that the skeleton could belong to. There's just nowhere to even start with the search. What do you think happened to lead to the dead man in the mountains? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos like these coming up.
Lot's Monastery. In the Bible, God agreed that he would spare the people of Sodom from destruction if he could only find a few decent human beings among the sinners. But this was a difficult task, and the only good-natured souls he found were those of Lot and his family. And so God destroyed the city of Sodom and all the sinners inside with a great fiery blast. After the destruction of Sodom, Lot and his family fled and sought shelter in a mountain cave. The exact cave in which the biblical family took refuge can be found today near the Dead Sea in Jordan, close to the modern town of Safi. This is where archaeology and the Bible come together. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of human habitation around the cave dating to the 1st century BC. This suggests that during the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a primitive Bronze Age presence here. Then, in the 5th century, a monastery was built within the cave to honor Lot and his family. The only thing missing is evidence that Lot himself lived in the cave. All we've really been able to discover is that some people lived nearby, and that Lot's secret cave was a sacred place of worship for the Christians and the Muslims until at least the end of the 9th century. It was around then that the monastery was abandoned.
Plane wreckage. In one of the most remote parts of India's Himalaya mountains, a missing plane from World War II was just recently discovered. The plane crashed into the mountains roughly 80 years ago in 1945. Tragically, there were no survivors. A search followed the initial crash but was called off because it was lost too high up in the mountains. None of the bodies of the 13 people on board the C-46 transport were ever found. It was a U.S. adventurer named Clayton Coulis who led the mission after being approached by the son of one of the people who died on board. The expedition took several months, especially since Clayton didn't know exactly where to look. He and his team of guides had to wade through rivers up to their chest and camp in freezing caverns at extraordinarily high altitudes in their search. 3 of the guides unfortunately died from hypothermia when they got caught in a snowstorm. But through all the hardship, the team finally came across the plane near the mountaintop. They identified the wreckage by the tail number, though the aircraft was in pretty harsh shape. Pieces of it were scattered across the rocks and snow, and even though it's been identified, the adventurer didn't find any bodies. They are likely still there, hidden under the frozen terrain. Do you think it was worth all the death and misery to give closure to the families of the original crash? Or was it simply more tragedy added to the original? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Ancient cave artifacts. A discovery in a Mexican cave located deep in a rural mountain range may just be changing the timeline of human arrivals in America. For pretty much all the 20th century,
Archaeologists have agreed that human beings crossed the land bridge from Siberia and entered North America no later than 1,300 years ago. Now, a new study at Chiquihuite Cave by researchers with the Autonomous University of Zacatecas has pushed the date back to 26,500 years. The cave, 9,000 feet above sea level in the Astillero Mountains, has revealed stone artifacts, tools used for cutting, animal bones, pieces of charcoal, and sediment samples, all dated over 26,000 years old. The consensus here is that humans came from Siberia much earlier than ever imagined, but that they meandered up into the mountains and lived in caves instead of building settlements. They very well could have lived in caves for 10,000 years until finally moving down into the lowlands, building settlements, and slowly evolving with the rest of humanity in other parts of the world. Would you want to live in a cave? Let me know in the comments below. St. Hilarion Castle. St. Hilarion Castle is one of the most imposing structures in the world. It's an actual castle perched at the very peak of a mountain, looking like something straight out of a fairy tale. It's located in the country of Cyprus, right at the top of the Kyrenia mountain range. From the ruins of this ancient fortification, one can overlook the entire Mediterranean Sea, behold all the land surrounding Cyprus, and look down on the little people moving through the city below like ants. On a clear day, you can even see all the way to Turkey. It's such a mystical place that Walt Disney allegedly used it in his inspiration when making Sleeping Beauty. And guess what? The Crusaders even used this castle almost 1,000 years ago. The history of the mountain castle can be traced back to around the 10th century. It was named after Saint Hilarion, a monk who fled persecution and died somewhere in a cave within the mountain. The Byzantines built a church and monastery on the mountain following his death. Then, shortly after, Saint Hilarion Castle was built as a watchtower. People were posted in the tower to keep a 24-hour lookout for pirates threatening the coast of Cyprus. The castle became strategically important. The nobility began to use it as a summer resort, but by the 15th century it was left a ruin. The Venetians actually dismantled most of the castle just so they wouldn't have to pay for its upkeep anymore.
Mountains in the earth. I've already told you about mountains on the moon, and now it's time to talk about subterranean mountains underneath the surface of the earth. According to National Geographic, you could be standing at the very top of an enormous mountain, even taller than Mount Everest right now, and not even know it. This might sound like something out of a fantasy book, but it's completely true. There is a geological boundary that scientists found about 400 miles beneath the surface. The boundary has enormous mountains that would give you vertigo just trying to see their tops. How could we have possibly made such an amazing discovery? Scientists identified these subsurface mountains by using seismic waves from earthquakes. They tracked the signals kind of like extremely advanced subterranean echolocation to get a rough idea of the underground mountains. There isn't a hollow earth fantasy landscape 400 miles deep, but rather hard, rugged rock. The mountains were probably created by the rearrangement of elements and chemicals. The point is that something very strange is happening deep beneath our feet. If you broke the earth open like a coconut, you would find enormous mountains hiding near the center.
Allora Mountain Caves. The Allora Mountain Caves, also known as Allora, is a sacred site in India dating back to about 1,500 years ago. The caves are all part of one major archaeological site, but they are spread out within the Sahyadri Hills. There are a total of 35 caves, each one filled with spectacular monuments to either Hinduism, Buddhism, or Jainism. Allora is one of the most impressive rock-cut architectural wonders in India. Most of the caves are natural, but many have been widened and improved upon to make them more impressive. The most spectacular thing about them is that they contain various statues and decorations. The earliest cave, which dates back to the 6th century AD, celebrates Hinduism and is known as the Hindu Ramesvara. It's loaded with vestibules and high-relief friezes, and great carvings showing scenes from the Hindu sacred text called the Puranas. Another cave has spectacular carvings of river goddesses on its exterior, with a massive dancing Shiva inside, along with an image of the buffalo demon king. We can also see in these mountain caves how religion changed throughout the centuries in ancient India. Most of the carvings are decorated in Hindu reliefs starting in the 6th century. However, there are Buddhist caves that appear in the 7th and 8th centuries. These caves have figures of Buddha instead of the mythological figures from Hinduism. The preferred religion of the area depended on who the king was at the time, and so it was frequently switched back and forth.
Prehispanic Ruins. On a mountaintop in Mexico, experts recently investigated stone monuments estimated to be over 1,500 years old. It wasn't actually the experts that found the monuments, but a group of villagers who recognized the 2 stone artifacts as being ancient and called the professionals in to investigate. Archaeologists now believe the mountaintop site was once a major place of importance. They believe there were 7 pyramids here, a massive ceremonial center, and a full games court. It was inhabited by the Zapotecs, the people who dominated central Mexico in the area of what is today Oaxaca. If you've ever heard of the great ruins of Monte Albban, they were left behind by the Zapotecs. Direct descendants of the Zapotecs still live today in the thousands and throughout the region. Some descendants have preserved and can still speak their ancient language. Sadly, the pyramids and games court and any other structures that may have stood at the mountaintop are long gone. The only things still standing are faded stones and the carvings left on them. By comparing the carvings to others from the Zapotecs, researchers believe they were meant to represent the god of the underworld. It's unclear what all this means right now. The stones were uncovered at the top of Cerro de Peña mountain at a height of 6,000 feet. The site would have been hidden in the 6th century and only accessible via a rocky path nearly 3 hours straight up. It was likely of great ritual importance and definitely had something to do with the lord of the underworld. Choqquequirao. The Cradle of Gold, also known as Choqquequirao, was built by the great Inca Empire sometime in the 15th century. It covers a massive area of over 4,000 acres and is a shocking 9,000 feet above sea level. Forget about Machu Picchu, this is the true lost mountain city of the Inca. It overlooks the Apurimac River, probably founded by Topa Yupanqui, the 10th Sapa Inca and 5th ruler of the Hanan dynasty. He was also the son of Pachacuti, who was responsible for founding Machu Picchu. As you can probably tell, nearly every great ruler seemed obsessed with commissioning their very own city. Machu Picchu was so great that Yopa Yupanqui couldn't help himself but try to imitate it. He went a few miles down the road, up another mountain, and then built his city there. But there are other cities in the area as well, each of them way up in the Andes. There is Sayhuite, Chabamba, Guamanmarca, and Choquesuyus, all of them strikingly similar to Machu Picchu in terms of architectural style and construction techniques. Each of these sites is centered around a pair of main plazas on the very highest crest of a mountain ridge. The cities all contain temples, dwellings for the highest status members of the communities, bathing systems, common houses, and cultivated agricultural areas. And the same can be said of Choqquequirao, but this city is a little special in the sense that it had a lot of religious structures. This site also aligns directly with the solstices in June and December, making it one of the most important places in the Inca Empire for ceremonial activities. It was also a very important place following the Spanish conquest in the 1500s. Even after the Inca Empire collapsed, a stronghold of Neo-Inca survivors was established here in 1537. They survived until the death of the last Inca ruler, Tupac Amaru, 40 years later. Why do you think ancient rulers loved building cities so high in the mountains? Let me know your theories below. Great Flood Fossils. 8,300 feet from sea level, at the very top of a mountain, a man took a video of some rocks. We don't know exactly which mountain this was, but the video was uploaded on TikTok and it showed mysterious rocks with fossils embedded inside of them. The rocks appeared to hold the remains of squid-like creatures, monsters with tentacles that almost looked like aliens. People were quick to label this discovery as proof of the biblical flood. But paleontologists came to the rescue to identify the fossils and explain the situation. It turns out what this guy found at the top of that mountain were actually crinoids, small sea creatures related to starfish. They lived in the Paleozoic era, and so the fossils were between 250 and 500 million years old. According to Natural History Museum curator Tim Ewen, they're called sea lilies, and they were like flowers anchored to the sea floor. Their tentacles were used to catch small food particles floating in the water and bring that food into its mouth, which was located at the base of its arms. Crinoids are still alive today, living over 300 feet deep in the world's oceans. The reason these ancient ones were found on the top of a mountain, over 8,000 feet above sea level, has to do with tectonic plates. Mountains are made when the tectonic plates in the Earth's crust shift, pushing matter upward very slowly until it forms a point and the plates stop moving. When the crinoids were alive, the mountain would have been at the bottom of the sea. The animal died, its fossils settled into the dirt, and then it got pushed up over a span of millions of years until it reached the top of the mountain.
Ancient Mexican mountain cave. At first glance, the Chiquihuite Cave in Mexico doesn't seem like a very nice place to live. It's a dark, creepy, unforgiving cave high in the desert mountains of central Mexico. It's also been excavated continuously for about the last decade. The reason is that the mysterious cave holds evidence of human occupation in North America going back 30,000 years. For any of you who remember your history class, you'll probably remember that scientists used to believe that humans first arrived on the continent only 15,000 years ago, give or take a few years.
This one mountain cave where primitive humans once rested their heads has evidence that will make every school need to rewrite their history books. Archaeologist Cyprian Ardelean and his fellow researchers have already unearthed thousands of artifacts from the floor of the mountain cave. They found ancient blades, points from projectiles, and flakes of rock that had been used for making primitive tools. All the evidence points to human habitation. They even found bits of charcoal in the layers of sediment, meaning humans had been starting fires in the cave. It's possible that cave people lived here for around 15,000 or 17,000 years before they went out into the light and eventually formed great civilizations like the Maya and the Aztecs. If you really think about it, that's pretty amazing. People literally started off in Mexican mountain caves, gradually went up to the surface, and over a shockingly short amount of time, developed a complex society.
Monte Albban. Monte Albban is one of the biggest ceremonial sites found anywhere in Mesoamerica. It's only exceeded in size by Teotihuacan, which is located near Mexico City. This is quite impressive considering the sheer number of ritual hubs found throughout the old kingdoms of the Toltec, Maya, Aztec, and Olmec. The mysterious mountain ruins here contain some of the oldest writing in all of Mexico. There are strange rock engravings called danzantes that show humanoid beings with weird features. Between the bizarre carvings and the almost hieroglyphic script, some have suggested the people of Monte Albban had contact with a culture from the other side of the world. What we do know based on archaeological excavations is that the original buildings of Monte Albban were built around 1000 BC. However, it's unclear who exactly built them. This is because about 900 years later, the Zapotec showed up and destroyed the original buildings, constructing their own structures on top of them. The astronomical observatories and huge pyramids standing at Monte Albban today are the newest features of the site, built over the ruins of even older buildings.
Giant prehistoric crocodiles. New evidence has revealed that in the Canadian province of British Columbia, located just north of the U.S. state of Washington, there were once giant crocodiles. Fossils of terrifying creatures have been discovered in the mountainous Peace region of BC, near Tumbler Ridge. These weren't simply crocodiles. They were mega prehistoric crocodiles. The fossils aren't of actual bones, but tracks left behind by the crocodiles around 95 million years ago. Researchers also found the tracks of ankylosaurs and turtles, but it's the crocodiles that really stood out. Based on the distance between each claw impression, researchers say the body was roughly 36 feet long. That makes it about twice the size of any living crocodile today. It would have been a major apex predator and not something you'd want to tangle with. Biblical scrolls. High above the salty flats of the Dead Sea, way above the Judean desert and its rough brown hills, there are mountain caves filled with treasure. At least the caves used to be filled with treasure. Of course, this is the mountainous region in Israel, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were first discovered in the 1950s by Bedouin shepherds. After the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, people from all over descended on the area and dug through every cave they could find in hopes of discovering a fragment
and making some cash. It was a catastrophe for archaeologists, but there was one cave that was extraordinarily difficult to reach, a place nicknamed the Cave of Horror. It's about 260 feet directly beneath the top of a cliff, flanked by steep gorges and only accessible by rappelling straight down on a sheer cliff wall. It wasn't exactly an easy place for scavengers to search for scroll fragments 70 years ago. And so it's no surprise that recently dozens of biblical scroll pieces were taken from the cave by professional archaeologists with the latest equipment. Amazingly, these were the first finds of their kind in over 60 years. Archaeologists found fragments written in Greek from the biblical books of Zechariah, Nahum, and the Book of the 12 Minor Prophets. Even more fascinating is that the team discovered a perfectly woven basket from 10,500 years ago, making it the oldest complete basket ever found. They also came across the mummified remains of a child 6,000 years old. Not only was the cave used by early Jews to hide fragments of religious work, but it also appears to have been occupied by cave people. How they managed to get to and from such a precarious spot is a huge mystery. How do you think they got there? Lost Roman sandal. 1,700 years ago, somebody lost their sandal. It was in the 4th century AD, and an ancient traveler was making their way through a challenging mountain pass 6,000 feet above sea level. We don't know where they came from, but perhaps Rome. Whatever the case, they found themselves in western Norway. And for whatever reason, this person lost their sandal as they moved through the snow, and it got stuck in the ice. All these years later, that mysterious sandal has finally been found. If you think your shoes don't last long enough, you're right. This worn leather sandal, which was all the rage in Rome in the 4th century, has survived for almost 2,000 years. It was only revealed because of the unusually warm summer in Norway and was spotted by a random hiker. The hiker was educated enough to realize it had major historical value, and so he photographed the artifact and pinned its location. It was later picked up by archaeologists with a program called Secrets of the Ice, who specialize in glacial discovery. They've already discovered other things in Norway's melting glaciers, from medieval skis to discarded tunics once worn by Viking warriors. Aliens in the mountains. A retired official who goes by the alias Anjali says that she had a meeting in 2018 with extraterrestrials in the Mojave Desert in Nevada. This woman claims to be a retired defense intelligence officer who was put in charge of forming a team of scientists. This team of scientists was charged with holding meetings with aliens. All of this may sound completely crazy, and maybe it is. Either way, she actually held a news conference at the Lincoln Memorial in August of 2021 to discuss her part, given to her by the United States government in parlaying with extraterrestrials. One of her other shocking claims is that deep in the Mojave Desert is an alien base inside a hollowed mountain. Her real name is Angelica Lynn Johnston, and she said in her news conference that she will be bringing an astronaut and some scientists to the secret base so that they can meet with the supposed aliens. But she never did give a date for when this is going to take place, and she couldn't actually give a specific location for the secret base. Either there are aliens living in the mountains of the Mojave, or this woman is a complete lunatic. We just don't know. Termesos. Solimnius was an Anatolian god worshipped in ancient Turkey. He was later identified with the Greek god Zeus and was worshipped by the cult of Zeus Solimneos. This was typical in many parts of the ancient world. One deity would become popular in a place far from its original home, and it would be merged with the local gods to create a kind of super god. This god is associated with the city of Termesos. It was built and inhabited by a group called the Solymi, who derived their name from the god Solimneos. These people, little more than a small tribe in ancient history, built this city around 2,000 years ago in the Taurus mountain range. Sadly, this is all we know about the ancient tribe and their city. The only historical account we have comes from the Anabis of Alexander, written by Arrian of Nicomedia while Alexander the Great was still alive. In the ancient text, it says that Alexander surrounded the mountain city of Termesos in 333 BC, but he failed to capture it. Alexander said the city was like an eagle's nest,
sheltered in the mountains, and impossible to take for himself. The conqueror eventually left the city to its own devices, and in 71 BC, the people of Termesos became allies of Rome. Its population reached a maximum of about 150,000 residents, but by the 5th century AD, the whole place was abandoned. Its position in the mountains proved unwise, as the whole city was brought to ruin by an earthquake.
The super mountains. Scientists have made a bizarre discovery of something they're calling super mountains. This discovery isn't something found in the mountains, but a set of actual ancient mountains that are long gone. Researchers published their findings in a scientific journal, detailing a previously unknown mountain range that they've named the Nuna Super Mountains. The mountain range existed 1.8 billion years ago. These great mountains existed on an extremely old continent called Nuna, which combined modern pieces of land from Africa, Eurasia, South America, and Australasia. While the mountains may not have actually been taller than the Himalayas, they were certainly longer. While the height remains uncertain in terms of sheer scale, they made the Himalayas look like a pile of sand on the beach. They were about 3 times longer than the entire Himalayan mountain range, stretching roughly 4,500 miles. Here's another interesting piece of information. The research team discovered that the mountains existed at the same time as a major evolutionary change on the planet. It was right around the time that life began figuring itself out in a very small way. Scientists from the Australian National University believe it was the crumbling destruction of this mountain range that actually helped develop early planetary life. As the mountain built up and then broke apart, the erosion and sedimentation leaked substances like phosphorus into the ancient oceans. It was a lot of moving pieces, and it likely all worked out to spur on the creation of the first single-celled organisms. Lost Viking Village. On a remote pass in the Norwegian mountains, archaeologists came across a Viking settlement. Of course, nothing remains of the settlement today except marks in the ground where it had once stood. But there was one here, and it was huge. The settlement was found on a mountain trail that's been the source of many discoveries over the past few years. Because of Norway's melting glaciers, the mountain pass here has been revealing thousands of artifacts, things like household items, broken sleds, lost skis, pieces of clothing, and all kinds of other artifacts. A total of 21 structures have been discovered so far in this mountain pass, in an area completely covered by thick juniper bushes. You would never even imagine there had been buildings here because the whole place is overgrown with bushes. There's nothing left except impressions on the ground. It wasn't until archaeologists like Reidar Marstein and Lars Pilo started digging beneath the dirt that they were able to find scraps of outer walls and evidence of low embankments. It took a lot of work, and excavations are still ongoing, but there was a huge city here high up in the mountains between 750 and 1150 AD. That's roughly the entire time the Viking Age lasted. What that means is that while the Vikings were pillaging and terrorizing, and while people in Norway were moving through the mountains from one place to another, this settlement acted as a waypoint. It was a fully functioning city that catered to travelers moving across the brutal landscape. Would you rather explore snow-covered mountaintops or mountains in a warm climate? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Ancient people in the hills. Researchers believe they may have just made the oldest archaeological find on the Indian subcontinent. They came across rock art, mysterious engravings, and ancient tools inside caves and rock shelters in the mountainous Mangar Bani region. The caves and shelters were used in the Paleolithic era by primitive humans. Plus, Mangar Bani is part of one of the oldest mountain ranges in the entire world, but was once a great series of towering rock formations stretching all the way from North India down into the west. But since ancient times, the mountains have been blasted away or naturally destroyed, and very few remain. The cave paintings were first discovered in 2021 by a local environmental activist. The activist came across them in a remote part of the forest and couldn't believe their luck. As for the stone tools, they were found in the rock shelters. The tools are extremely basic, made from pebbles and flakes of rock, and they represent the first standardized system of tool making. Putting all these awesome discoveries together, researchers are confident that humans occupied the mountains here for at least 100,000 years, only fleeing about 1,000 years ago. It's now looking like Mangarbani could be one of the biggest Paleolithic sites in the world. The 1976 Bigfoot. In 1976, a man in Oregon was intent on proving that Bigfoot really does exist. His name is Peter Byrne, currently 95 years old, and still searching for Bigfoot. He's been searching for almost a century, despite the fact that everyone seems to think he's completely crazy, and that Bigfoot is nothing but a figment of people's imaginations. But to be honest, nobody has gone after Bigfoot harder than Peter. He went on an expedition in Nepal in the 1950s to try and discover the Yeti living in the Himalayan mountains. He found a few footprints up there in the snow at altitudes of 15,000 feet, but these were never authenticated as belonging to a great mountain ape. In the 1960s, Peter moved to Oregon and directed the Bigfoot Information Center and Exhibition. He continued trying to track down the elusive Bigfoot, sometimes known as Sasquatch. He even got in touch with the FBI in the 1970s after he discovered something mysterious in the Washington mountains. There had been a Bigfoot sighting at a campground with a large tuft of hair left behind. Peter got in touch with FBI Assistant Director J. Cochran Jr. in November of 1976 and sent the sample of hair to be tested. The FBI agreed to test the hair for Peter. Sadly, it turned out to be from a deer. And now, all these years later, Peter still hasn't been able to prove that a mountain monster exists, either in the mountains of Nepal or in the northwest of the United States. What about you? Do you think Bigfoot really exists? Let me know in the comments below.
The Hall of Records. There is a place in the United States that looks like something you would expect to find in the mountains of old Persia. It's called the Hall of Records, and it's located at Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. Carved in stone behind the head of President Abraham Lincoln is a massive chamber which contains all the history of America up until the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt. While this isn't an ancient archaeological site, it most certainly will be in the future. If the American civilization ever collapses and Mount Rushmore falls to pieces, this vault will be discovered thousands of years from now. People in the future will uncover a mysterious time capsule within a 70-foot cavern blasted out of the mountainside using dynamite in 1938. Oddly enough, shortly into the project, the mastermind behind it, Gutzon Borglum, died unexpectedly. His plan was to create a deep vault holding a copy of everything from the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, with the vault accessible by a huge staircase winding up the mountain. However, after he died in 1941, the government decided it wasn't worth it to preserve history for the future. They didn't want to spend the money, so they abandoned the project. It wasn't until 1998 that 16 porcelain panels were sealed inside of a titanium vault within the Hall of Records. The vault was then covered by a granite slab and sealed for eternity. The Hall of Records is closed to the public, but it will be an incredible discovery for people in the future who stumble upon it.
A very scary plant. An entirely new type of carnivorous plant has been discovered living high up in the mountain bogs. The flower, called false asphodel, lives in the wetlands of western North America at high altitudes. It can be found all the way from the mountains in California to the mountains of Alaska. And although the plant itself has been known to scientists for at least 100 years, no one ever knew it was actually a carnivorous plant. It wasn't until botanist Qianxi Lin began investigating the mysterious mountain flower that she realized it was a meat eater. By closely studying the false asphodel, she discovered that it gets most of its nutrition from eating insects. It has very sticky traps, which it uses to catch bugs that land on it. Then it slurps up their vital nutrients, getting about 2/3 of its necessary nitrogen from living victims. Sacrifices to the god Zeus. On the top of a Greek mountain, archaeologists found something gruesome and altogether terrifying. They found the skeleton of a teenager, along with scraps of other bones and ashes. Why were there so many bones and ashes on top of the mountain? It's because they had likely been sacrificed to the god Zeus. The teenager was found without a head, laid down on a pile of ash 3,000 years ago at the peak of Lycaon Mountain. It's fascinating because never before have archaeologists found proof that a human sacrifice did take place at an altar to Zeus. Yet here, where a small temple and altar were constructed in dedication to the Lord of Olympus, somebody had been ritualistically murdered. Even though there were all kinds of ritual sacrifices going on in places like Carthage, the Inca Empire, the Aztecs, and many other places, it wasn't a thing for the Greeks. Yet there was one cult so nefarious that even Plato wrote about the horrifying human sacrifices they made in the name of Zeus. Archaeologists always thought these writings were just myths, like what Plato wrote of Atlantis. But now they've discovered an actual sacrificial victim on a mountaintop. It looks like there may have been a real cult that killed people. Matera. Matera has been described by some as the most spectacular city in all of Italy. It's an ancient place filled with mountain grottos and caves carved into the mountainside. Archaeologists have found proof of human habitation in these mountain caves going back to the Paleolithic period, up to 7,000 years ago. They were simple people living in the dark niches and foraging for food. All of these years later, many of the caves have been converted into suave hotels and trendy restaurants. The very places where early humans clapped stones together to make fire, rich tourists are now complaining about the slow Wi-Fi. What's really interesting is that Matera is a recent phenomenon. Almost nobody knew about it until 1993, when it was put on the UNESCO World Heritage Site list. And before that, Matera was considered a scourge on Italian society. Up until the 1950s, it was known specifically for poverty, malaria, and infant mortality. People were still living inside the caves with no running water or electricity in the same deplorable conditions as thousands of years earlier. Between 1953 and 1968, about 30,000 people were moved off the mountain and into real physical houses, which were built in a new modern city below. A box of treasure. Last summer, somebody stashed $10,000 in cash in the mountains of Utah. 17 days later, Andy Swagner from Draper found that buried chest while searching with his wife. It was filled, as promised, with $10,000 of cold, hard cash, a single silver coin, and a few other cool trinkets. He dug the buried treasure up at Hughes Canyon Trail near the mouth of the Big Cottonwood Canyon. Andy dug the treasure chest out from under a dead tree and told local news that he plans to use the cash to pay off some debts and then take his daughters to Disneyland. But let's back up a bit. Who in their right mind would bury so much money in a treasure chest just so people could go hunting for it? Well, it was hidden by John Maxim and David Klein as part of their second annual Utah treasure hunt. The hunt is supposed to be a thing that's happening every year now as a way to encourage people to go outside and get some fresh air. If you happen to be in Utah next summer, a trip into the mountains may just earn you a literal treasure.
St. Hilarion Castle. St. Hilarion Castle is the ancient mountain fortress that Walt Disney supposedly used as inspiration for the castle in the Disney classic Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This ancient building is positioned on the top of a mountain overlooking the city of Gurney in Cyprus. While the castle is little more than a decrepit ruin these days, with its towers crumbling and its roof long since collapsed, it isn't hard to see where Disney got his inspiration from. Long ago, this place really was a fairy tale castle. St. Hilarion Castle gets its name from a hermit who supposedly fled to the top of the mountain following the Arab conquest of the Holy Land. Legend has it there was originally a monastery here that was built in his honor, but no archaeological evidence of such a thing has ever been found. The castle itself was likely built between the 10th and 11th century by the Byzantine Empire, and then was used as a fortress during the Crusades. Cyprus was one of the most crucial strategic military outposts throughout the Crusades because of its convenient location in the Mediterranean Sea. The fortress was built to command the road leading from Kyrenia to Nicosia. It was first used as a defense against Arabian pirates, but then it became a summer residence for French royalty before being abandoned and dismantled in the 15th century.
Noah's Ark. It looks like Noah's Ark has been discovered in Turkey. At least that's according to biblical archaeologists who recently used ground-penetrating radar to look at Mount Tendurik. According to some, it's this very mountain which was described in the Bible as the location where Noah landed his ark after the great flood described in the Bible's book of Genesis. While the belief that this rocky formation is actual evidence of the biblical ark is unconfirmed, the shape does look remarkably similar to that of a boat. The team consists of researchers from both the US and Turkey, led by ark hunter Andrew Jones.
Andrew says preliminary scans reveal some kind of massive object, almost definitely artificial. Unfortunately for Jones and his team, geologists aren't buying the story. They say that what the Ark hunters are looking at is nothing but an ordinary rock formation. The White Mountain Petroglyphs. Wyoming's White Mountain formed sometime over 30 million years ago. It can be found north of Rock Springs in the Red Desert and boasts some of the most fascinating petroglyphs ever found at this altitude. High up in the mountain, carved into its white rock, you can discover ancient drawings of animals like bison and elk that were at least 1,000 years old. There are also small footprints, handprints, and geometric forms of great mysteries scratched into the mountain, and even one picture of a warrior shown brandishing a sword. This is pretty bizarre, because the Native American people who drew these petroglyphs, members of tribes like the Shoshone and the Arapaho, didn't use medieval swords. So what was it? That is the question. Human cave fossils. In a dusty mountain cave in South Africa, fossils of ancient human ancestors have been discovered. These fossils are older than anyone could have ever imagined. In fact, the fossils discovered at Sterkfontein Cave are so old that some scientists can't even believe it. They date back to about 3.6 million years ago, making them even older than the legendary Lucy fossil found in the Ethiopian desert back in 1979. Lucy belonged to a species called Australopithecus afarensis that lived 3.2 million years ago. Preliminary research shows that the fossils found in the South African cave also belong to the genus Australopithecus. However, they may have been a different species. The cave itself is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site Cradle of Humankind. It's considered to be the cradle of all humanity, located in the Rocky Hills northwest of Johannesburg. The caves in this area have more Australopithecus remains than anywhere else in the world, and may predate any other hominin found on Earth by over 1 million years. Thanks for watching! Would you rather live in a castle or a cave high up in the mountains? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!